Om Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsa Chanuramvartanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum. I salute Lord Krishna, world teacher, son of Vasudeva, destroyer of Kamsa, Chanura, supreme bliss of Devaki. Om Sahanavatu Sahanau Bunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditam Asto Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat. May that one nourish us both. May that one protect us both. Give us great vigor and strength. Give us vigor and strength in our studies. May we not unnecessarily argue. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. In times of crisis, we have to learn to shift our attention and understand how does this universe arrive in such a curious way. And philosophy has the answer. It is God's play, God's drama, which means the only antidote to all your problems is a sense of humor. So we in this ashram have a little bit of a sense of humor. And Swami Vimokshananda arrived in Dublin, complete with his cap. And so we were discussing this last week, or a few days ago, and made a communal decision that he would wear his cap. But then the challenge was that I should wear mine. And so herewith in front of you, Swami Purnananda plus cap. We are continuing chapter 13 of the Srimad Bhagavad Gita, the very important subject of Kshetra Kshetrajna Vibhaga Yoga, that is the distinction between two things. Just to recap on the whole state of affairs of this chapter, just to remind you, it is obvious that when we want to find out any two things, any aspect of the world in front, two factors are obviously apparent. One is that there are objects in front of us. There are objects, and these objects can be external and internal. External objects we can only catch with sense organs. If we're one organ short, we catch something less. Then the other thing is that there's a perceiving consciousness. There's a very interesting paradigm that is developing among modern science today. And it is pioneered by two very, very well-respected scientists. One is a man who's done a lot of work in the field of genetics, and the other man is an astronomer, both highly regarded in their respective scientific fields. And what we find is they have come up with a coined term, biocentrism. Knowing that there are various problems in modern science today, and we're not sure where we stand. On the one hand, we have this world which seems to be completely real. It seems to be completely tangible to our senses. Things are seen, things are heard, touched, tasted. And we know from our modern science, it's not quite like that. Even when you're looking at me and seeing the various distinguishing colors, we know that it's not exactly like that. So I gave a talk on Sunday morning and highlighted this fact. These are colorless photons that arrive through the eye and arrange themselves in the retina. At the back of the eye, there are cones. They rearrange the image and supply color. They interpret the various wavelengths, and the color and the form and the shape is not apparent, according to modern science, is not what is seen tangibly in front of us. It's just images in the mind. In fact, they would actually say in the brain. So that means that what we see, what we feel to be real, is not exactly what is there. I also pointed out in the same talk that since the whole of material existence, this body, for example, is a sample of this, is in fact mainly space. It doesn't look like that. My gut doesn't tell me this. And yet, from a science point of view, it's so. So we have this great theory that works very well in the grand cosmos, the theory of relativity. But if the standard model of cosmology is correct, it goes back to a nothing. And nothing means no laws. And nothing means no time. And nothing means no space. And nothing means no description. And last week, we pretty much described the Brahman in this same way. Brahman was described. And Brahman in this context was equated with a knower as opposed to a field, the perceiving entity that witnesses this field. By itself, it doesn't perceive anything. But when it's conjoined with the field, it is the witness. Not only the witness is described as the enjoyer in language that was humanly expressed. Because you see, if you watch a play, a drama, and you're one of the players, the chances are you might be nervous and not exactly enjoy the play. You'll be trying to remember, what are my lines? You'll be trying to remember, where's my entrance? You'll be trying not to knock the scenery down. There'll be an element possibly of nervousness. Even the most accomplished artists and actors will tell you that before they go on the stage, they're happy to announce that they have what they call butterflies, a kind of inner nervousness. And then they go on, and it's familiar territory, and they forget. They forget all about the audience, all about any self-evaluations. Will I be successful? Will I not be successful? All of these are taken over by the fact that a kind of identity is given. The person becomes the part. The plot is understood. The unconscious, as it were, takes over. The habitual behavior kicks in. All rehearsals come in, and this forgetfulness occurs. But you cannot say that the player completely enjoys his or her own performance. It's only when you're sitting in the audience, when you've paid a vast sum of money to get a reserved seat and sit there happily, anticipating possibly popcorn at the interval or something of that nature, that you're able to relax and enjoy the performance. And so it's the same thing. A witness is also an enjoyer, and this is how it's described. And so it's very important to see that this is a principle, and part of the principle is that we have to understand it. We have to understand this distinction between this knower, that is, this perceiver of the field, independently perceiving, as it were, and the field itself, the object. I say as it were, because Sankhya philosophy will tell us that the Purusha and the Prakriti are separate. The Prakriti, the nature, has no feeling. It's inert, it's insentient. It's just chemicals, just atomic structures. It's like an entity that has legs, but no eyes. And the Purusha has eyes, but no legs. And so how do you reconcile these two? You have some kind of monster with legs, supposing legs, human legs and a human person, but blind. And then a sighted person sitting on the shoulders, and off they go as a unit. This is a Sankhya kind of perception. Vedantic perception is different. Vedantic perception says that this Purusha and this Prakriti are two aspects of the same entity. We cannot separate the two. No more than we can separate any of the qualities that are there in this nature from the entity itself. No more can we separate the radiance of the sun and its beams and the sun itself. We cannot separate milk and its whiteness. We cannot separate the various qualities that are manifested and perceived in nature, giving us the impression nature itself is an independent animate object. But it's not. It requires the coordination of this inner life. And so these two scientists have written a book on biocentrism, a kind of philosophy, and they admit at the very outset that we may well have borrowed these concepts from Eastern philosophy. Borrowed? Yes, pretty much the whole thing they've taken. But it's nothing new. They got it from ancient Greeks also, and they got it from this ancient Vedanta philosophy, and they probably got it from its ancestor Buddhism, and they understood that you cannot have a universe, insentient as it is, without the beginnings of it. The beginnings of it is life and consciousness. They put it like this. Life and consciousness are the subtitles of this book. Biocentrism, life and consciousness, arising from these two factors. So there has a living sentient entity. You give it another example. Supposing you have a spider and its web. You can poke the web nicely. It just yields, it bounces. Sometimes breaks. It doesn't chase you. It doesn't react. It doesn't seem to feel anything. But when you poke the web, it's the spider that runs to the corner. And so there's a sentient and insentient, a mixture. And this is important to understand. First of all, we get the knowledge. And then we get the worthiness. Through practice, we become fit for the revelation. And then eventually we get the revelation described in various forms. Become one with me. These are some of the ways of describing it. And so it's important at the outset to understand that the basis of this chapter is that there's this perceiving consciousness, an unchanging witness of the changes, external and internal. Internal means the realm of psychology, the realm of physics and science, in that sense, objective science, to do with general relativity on the one side, and to do also with this irreconcilable, subtle aspect of it, which is quantum theory on the other. How to reconcile these two things. But the lesson we know from both is that this whole universe is not as certain as we think it is. And this is the language used by the philosophers, that it is neither real nor unreal. It is neither being nor non-being. It is neither sat nor asat. It is neither existent nor non-existent. It is completely inscrutable. Because how do we get a position where we can't really catch this Purusha? We only catch the nature. We have to learn to take off these appearances. And this chapter tells us how. We have to cultivate a number of qualities, noble qualities and values we have to cultivate. But what's the basis for doing that? The basis for doing that is to do with grieving. That is to do away with sorrow. And that sorrow equates also to immortality. It's only things that are mortal. It's only this issue of death that gives us this unhappiness, this unsettlement. It's the threat of this death that gives us anxiety. But when we know we are immortal, when we know our spiritual essence is completely immortal, when we know it, that means when we understand it, when it becomes a second nature to us, at that point, all the sorrow goes by itself. This is described in many, many different passages. And so there's this internal series of events that we are able also to witness. We're able to witness happiness, love, sadness. We're able to witness all the emotions that go through the field because we are not that. We are not the field. Earlier we did a meditation making this distinction. And then the field itself is described. Locally, for you, the field is this body. But what is this body? You can say this body and mind. Body has its limitations. We can't say the same about mind, where the borders are, a little bit more subtle. But this combination and the ownership sense of it is called ego. But this ego is also something that can be observed. It's also something internal. We can see whether the person feels happy, sad, threatened, or elated. We can see the variation in it. And then, of course, there's another aspect to this philosophy. But even when we see our spiritual progress, that is, when we measure, when we observe our reactions or the ego's reactions, and then when we see how these reactions change, when our behavior changes along scriptural lines, even that progress we can judge. So that entity that is witnessing is also evaluating. And when evolution is achieved, what we say is from darkness to light, that is the evolutionary process that we have, quoting the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. And there in that passage, where we take the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad as the first section with the third chapter and the 28th stanza, it actually defines what we mean by unreal, what we mean by darkness, what we mean by all these things. We mean death. What we mean by real, so unreal being death, the real is the opposite. Real is immortality. Light means immortality. And finally it says it, lead us from death to immortality. So we find this is what we are looking for. And so when many people are told we are studying the Upanishads, or we're studying Vedanta, or we're studying the Yoga Sutras, or we're studying the Bhagavad Gita, or we're studying any of the other subsidiary Vedantic texts, those belonging to Shankaracharya and others, you can see visibly some people's eyes glaze over nicely, and politely they nod and say, oh, thanks very much. I happen to be busy that Tuesday. But it seems every Tuesday they're busy. But why is it? It's because people don't understand the practical application of this, that it requires acknowledgement, which says, this old formula that I'm using in order to play the game in this field of endeavor, what is described here as kshetra, this field, where I gain the merits or demerits of my thoughts and actions. This field I'm trying to deal with, just as Arjun is trying to deal with the situation on the battlefield and how he will eventually deal with it on the battlefield. In other words, how he's doing his job, how he is employing his divine given skills, his role in life, in order to adjust the harmony, in order to adjust, in this case, social harmony. Every kind of harmony is harmony. Every kind of harmony is dharma. We also play our part, but we have to find a different way of playing it. We have to take our habit level and carefully cultivate it so that it becomes full of the quality of sattva. Sattva means illumination. Sattva's quality is, or characteristic is, there's no self-centeredness in it, no egocentricity. They're purely a spirit of generosity, where the ego becomes an open channel for divine grace, for the welfare of everyone and everywhere. Of course, that includes everything, includes me, includes everything. So a complete overhaul of the mind is required, but there's a minimum, we can say. 51% sattva and 49% other things is enough. We'd want for more, of course, but at least we can aim for gradually chipping away at the habit level. So even this darkness to life, this seeming progress that we make, is also observed and judged by the witness and evaluated. There's an interesting and wonderful passage in the Katha Upanishad, and we can say, Indriyanam pratabhava mudhya astamayo chayat. Knowing the separate nature or dissimilarity of the senses that spring separately and also their rising and setting. And here's the thing, repeated so often, it ends up by saying, na shochati. The wise do not grieve. Why is it that we grieve? Because we're not wise. The wise don't grieve. Are they heartless? No, they have just evaluated things in a very different way. How so? They understand that all these senses that we attribute to Prakriti, nature, that have been derived from subtle forces, there's a dissimilarity between that and also between the witness. And there's also a dissimilarity in different states of consciousness. And these differences, when they say rising and setting, refer directly here and in many other places in the Upanishads to the events of waking and dream, and also a state of homogeneous peace, where there's just no time, no space, no causation, no function, dreamless sleep. This subject is taken up and is a supreme argument in Vedanta to tell us and highlight that it is not just this world we're dealing with. There are other states of consciousness that, if we appreciate it, we can see how we are separate. The intrinsic self, this Purusha, is eternally separate and yet connected. Not only connected, but manifesting in a certain way. And so, not only that, but it seems that the self is there through which we perceive objects in the dream and waking state. It's not just a blank witness. It shines its light on these things. It's through its light that we also see these things. It lights up the stage of dream and the events taking place there. And when the stage is completely clear and there's only the curtains drawn and the blank stage and no scenery and only lighting, this we call a dreamless sleep. So we are able to observe all of this. Rupam rasam gandam, this is the passage, by which alone one knows form, taste, smell, sounds, touch, and pleasures. And what remains here unknown is that, and it always ends up, etat dvetat. This truly is that. So now let us now go, having given that summary background, to see where we left off. Karya karna kartritve hetu prakriti uchyate purusha sukha dukkhanam bhoktrite hetu uchyate. In the production of the body and the senses, Prakriti, nature, is said, it's a wonderfully diplomatic way of saying something. It is said to be the cause. So we attribute the cause of this, what is the body and senses, take away this identity with it and say that Prakriti is the cause. Now, in the experience of pleasure and pain, it says, Purusha is said to be the cause because without this consciousness that witnesses it, you come back to these two scientists telling us about biocentrism. Their whole point is this: how can we feel a mere bunch of chemicals if there's no life and no consciousness? It's not that the universe randomly provides us with life and consciousness. This is the normal way of thinking of things. It's the materialist reductionist idea that the universe starts off with a blank, and then in some way, inexplicably, we find over 200 different factors involved in order to make this what we call biological organic life. And more than that, thinking life, life that is able to ask these questions and examine the whole network and the whole detail and the whole mystery of the universe itself at all levels. All levels means at the subtlest level too. And there, all we come across is mystery, unexplained things. And if you try to say, no, it just so happened, all these factors got together and by chance managed to manufacture this book, these words, these historical events, these scientific calculations, this appreciation for art and music and culture, and a thinking, articulating, examining brain, and some entity there, something like a homunculus, a man within a man, somehow arriving at this, I think it's asking a lot. The other way is, no, what if it started off with life and consciousness? What if, because of life and consciousness, this biocentricism, all these factors are designed and arranged in such an order that it comes out? And how does it come out? What is Purusha? Purusha, we find, has these three characteristics attributed to Brahman of Sat Chit Ananda. When we come across all the life, let us say, the atomic life, let us say, stars and galaxies, and let us say, elements of steel and earth and carbon and so on and so forth. These mere chemicals, these mere molecules are exhibited evidence of Sat, existence. They exist. But only at the level of biological life do we find Chit coming out. Consciousness starts coming out. And from Brahman's point of view, it's always Ananda. It's always bliss. So we find these characteristics coming out because of the origin of life and consciousness. And when you examine the scientific data that goes with all of this, you'd have to be convinced completely, other than if you had a biased opinion and a preceding paradigm, as many people in modern science have, although it's shifting, and say adamantly, no, it can only be just material stuff. It can only be Prakriti in our language. There cannot be a Purusha. Then you come into all kinds of difficult interpretations, difficult models, difficult theories. The simplest thing is to say that this mix of consciousness and nature, this Prakriti and Purusha together, this life and consciousness makes what we have. And so there it is, in the production of the body and the senses, or any of these material things, this body made from yesterday's bananas, whatever it was, this is how the body is constructed. There's nothing more than that. It's just matter being transformed into a different kind of matter. But what is the life? There was the great physicist, Schrödinger, who entered into this field and gave a number of series of lectures in the late 1930s, I think it was. And there he compiled, there's a book, What is Life? And in there, apart from anything else, he predicts the structure of the DNA way before its time. He describes it in a crystalline way. So a very, very intelligent book with intelligent thinking. And why would he go into this? Because he was concerned about it. With all the weirdness of the quantum world. Niels Bohr said, if you're not shocked by quantum physics, then you have not understood quantum physics. It's a shocking thing, because what it says, among other things, and this is the standard way of looking at it, that people balk at it and therefore have made a number of other different approaches and interpretations to this problem. But the current thinking is that something does not exist until and unless a conscious observer is there to see it. All the interpretations mostly will require, anyway, an observer. That's demonstrably true. And then if we're arguing just for the sake of materialist paradigm, whether it's conscious or not, it will be absurd. Anybody who sees the data has to be a conscious entity. So that is some understandings from John Wheeler and others. And we can see by experimentation that the interference, or what we call the wave function, that the difficulty, the great mystery, one of the great mysteries there in the quantum theory will be this apparent uncertainty about it, the uncertainty principle. The fact that although the theory works well and results in sublime technological advances that we are currently using now for this very broadcast, to understand how it happens and why it happens is a different matter. It used to be in physics, everybody understood everything. And now all these things hang in the air. And until relatively recently, people were happy to keep it there. So we find this this wonderful explanation, really, of this evolutionary theory, both cosmologically and biologically, that we start off with this life and consciousness that here is described as Purusha. Now, Sri Ramakrishna has this to say. He says, plenitudes and blessings, such as Brahmanyana and the bliss of Brahman, come to us mortals because of the gracious mediation of Mahamaya. But for her intervention, none can have even a peep into the beyond. What to speak of getting fixed into the absolute? Experience of the transitory world also comes to man because of her grace. The enjoyer and the enjoyment do not exist outside her domain. So we need to explain a few things there. So what is called Brahmanyana, that is the knowledge or the bliss of Brahman, the bliss of the ultimate principle. This is what we are thinking would be the absolute goal of our life. And they come to us, see the expression, come to us mortals because of the gracious mediation of Mahamaya. What is Mahamaya? Mahamaya is this network of subtle events. Today I issued a thought, and so that thought was highlighting this issue. Today for many, it's New Year. And so when I wrote the thought, people may have been puzzled. Not only is he going mad, and confirmation is he has a cap. We call him a madcap from here on. So not only has he become a little deranged in his old age, but he thinks it's New Year. Some people may be thinking like that. Yes, of course it's New Year for some. But this highlights one very important thing. We're all different with different cultures. And New Year for one is not New Year for the other. And what is the time now is very different in a different region. That we know. Also, is there ever a now? The sun's rays, the photons from the sun, take 8 minutes to reach us. We are always looking at things in the past. Can we really say that time is a factor? Time is a convenient construct for us so that we have the opportunity to put something different and new in every single moment. Time comes before us, and it looks like an arrow of time. Second law of thermodynamics tells us that we have to have some sense of progression because things get, the entropy increases, that scrambledness becomes more and more. When we see that, it's an irreversible process. So there has to be, in that sense, a beginning, a middle, an end. But there's no requirement whatsoever, apart from this. In general relativity, the great successful theory of classical physics, deterministic physics, and the quantum theory, the most successful theory at the minuscule level, the subatomic level, there's absolutely no requirement for time there. In fact, certainly in quantum theory, we find a defiance of it. There's no such thing as a backwards or a forwards. There's no such thing other than a present. And so people have plotted this and said, you can put time going forward in the future one way, time going backward in the past the other way, but actually we can be anywhere we like on this. Time is something that we can stretch and that we can mold, and we don't have to say whether it was a future or a past. And from God's point of view, there's no time, no future, no past. It's all current present. So when we look at time, time is a component of Maya. Space and time are the fabric, the warp and woof. It's an interesting thing that we find, the description in the Upanishads. This is warp, like warp and woof. Woven, the question is asked in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, what is that? Or Yajnavalkya, that is woven, like warp and woof. And he says it's space. And this is the space-time of Einstein, a great revolutionary mind that said, look, I can understand, aha. There's an aha that's come with me. What you call gravity is mass impinging on a fabric of space and time. And the evidence of that is, if you can see something that curves through space, and the accenture of it, the exaggeration of it, is purely because of the increasing mass. When we see how the earth travels around the sun, when we see how the moon travels around the earth, and so on and so forth, it's simply impinging on a fabric of space and time, says general relativity. Now we know that space curves. That's quite evident. And we have every reason to believe, even the calculations will tell us, this is exactly the way it is. But imagine now the ancient people saying exactly the same and using this language, fabric, the fabric, like warp and woof, like material. One thread is going this way, another thread is going that way. And if you see how people want to depict a diagram of the space-time continuum, it's laid out in this way, as a kind of series of squares, like a kind of flexible fabric. Now, the ancient people also would have said that space and matter are the same thing. And I don't think modern science has caught up with that yet, because this word akasha is used not only for a basic unmanifest material on which energy acts, but is also used as in the context of space. So what is this Mahamaya? It is the illusion that things are solid. It is the illusion that there is space and time. It is the illusion that that the world exists, but you see, according to some aspects of quantum theory, it only exists when I look at it. When I, a conscious observer, observe it. When you, a conscious observer, observes it, it then becomes a reality. Otherwise, it's held in a state of limbo, a state of superposition of possibilities. This sounds extremely against your instinct. And that is Maya. Maya tells you what you feel, what you think, how you evaluate is a kind of trick, without which this game cannot continue. That is why we can also extend the term and say Maya, Lila Maya. It is a game. It is a game where different components appear and disappear. It's a game that assumes there's time and makes it look like that, and gives us the opportunity to put something valuable in it in order to change our very habit level, so that the whole Mahamaya falls away. And the only way we did it was through this Maya. Why Mahamaya? Because, don't forget, this Maya, this nature, this Prakriti, this Purusha, this Brahman are not different or separate. In two sides of the same coin. When we add time and space and causation and function, we have this world. When we take it all away, we have Brahman, the supreme principle. And so, but for her intervention, that is this personalized aspect put in feminine form, there's no culture that I ever know at all on this planet, now or historically, that ever stops referring to nature in feminine terms. We call it Mother Nature. We say Mother Earth. We always put the feminine side on. because we see the nurturing, giving aspect. Darwin wanted a situation in his day of fighting, biting, and scratching. He saw nature as crude and vicious. But if we read the very last commentary put in Swami Vivekananda's Raja Yoga at the very end of Patanjali Yoga Sutras, he gives a wonderful, wonderful eulogy for nature. He says, nature, our mother. He says, not fighting, not biting, not scratching. Nothing to do with Darwinism of his day. This kindly mother, he puts it like this, taking us gently by the hand and leading us forward and coming back for the next soul. This is the language he's using for it. So this is our mother, without which we cannot make sense of it. We cannot clear the way. And so that is why this Maya has these three components. What we call Prakriti, nature, Maya, has these three aspects to it. Three evolutionary forces going on. This is called, we call these Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas, but we call them gunas. Now imagine if you took 3 ropes and bound yourself. You bound yourself foot and hands. And then you decided, I can't get out. I don't know how I got into this, and I can't get out. But one thing, I love these ropes dearly. Like, some animals, domesticated animals, put into a certain small environment. Just take, for example, these small birds that we take, these canaries, for example. A small creature this size, and we put this creature in a cage. And I often wonder, what does this bird think of this? Since we can't speak the language of the birds, we don't know, but the bird sings anyway, seems quite happy. And yet, it can't really have the freedom to fly anywhere. It decides to make its home in this small cage and gets on with life, and maybe thinks this is the whole world to me. What is the whole world? It depends. Supposing you're an ant, what will the whole world be? You may, supposing there is some kind of insect and you're approaching it at night as a kind of creature with phosphorus. And so you find it rubs its legs and there's a light. And immediately stops blinking because you approached it, and you approached it with a torch. And when you leave, it goes back again. Who knows what went on? What was the experience? But the fact is that experience only comes with life and consciousness. There's no other way to experience it. Who knows what that insect thought, if the insect thinks, but what their awareness was, what the experience was, there's no doubt they had an experience. Their world is something different. It was a mystery. Imagine now you're in the world of the microorganisms, the world of bacteria. You may even say, to keep up with current times, the virus, the world of the virus. Many scientists don't think that the virus is life at all. And yet many scientists say it has to be, because it reacts to its environment and has the so-called intelligence to borrow life and propagation from other species. It lives on the host. It knows how to duplicate. It knows how to adapt. It knows how to mutate. So what is the world of a virus like? What is their universe like? What is the universe of any other creature? What is plant life? What is their universe like? So all of these take their environment, adapt to it, and assume that that's the reality for them. And that's what keeps their particular small universe going. And this is all due to Mahamaya And all these universes combine to make a wonderful harmony. And so her intervention, none can have even a peep into the beyond. You can't see it. You can't see the smallest of the small and the biggest of the big. You can't see beyond the border of the speed of light. So what to speak of getting fixed into the absolute, the transcendent of all of that, that which is beyond all the range, that which has no limitation. Experience of the transitory world, he would say, again, also comes to man because of what? Of her grace, that's all. Only her grace. And so he goes on, the enjoyer and the enjoyment do not exist outside her domain. And what a wonderful description he gives of this Prakriti in all its fullness. Now a question can arise. How has this Jivatman, this individual identity of Atman and this body, or Purusha and the immediate Prakriti, educated? In what manner is this educated by nature or Prakriti? So this is a question that crops up, and the answer comes in the next stanza. Purusha prakritisto hi bhungte prakritiyan gunan karanam gunasangasya asad yuni janmasu. This Purusha seated in Prakriti. You can imagine, you stop there and imagine that. The wonderful subject, apart from anything else, for meditation. You can imagine that it is seated within the Prakriti, and not only overall, but local as well, locally. Let's take this Prakriti locally as this human body, seated within the human body, experiences the gunas born of Prakriti. I started mentioning these three evolutionary forces of the gunas and how Mahamaya helps us. How? Because of her three aspects. Tamas means that she hides herself, a kind of darkness. This is the game she plays of hide and seek. Rajas means she manifests, she expresses herself. That is, she projects. She projects as some kind of unreal image. And then Sattva, she reveals. So she reveals as much as she hides, as much as she projects, but it's all to do with her grace. May she reveal herself, is our prayer. And so seated in Prakriti experiences the gunas born of Prakriti. Attachment to the gunas is the cause of a person's birth in good and evil wombs. And we may say that that is a cause of our misery in its turn. You ask somebody, why are you unhappy? They'll use a projection as an answer. Projection means nothing to do with me. So we gave a story. I think I gave it on Sunday morning, and I gave it also to the group in Belfast on Wednesday. And a wonderful story. And I also gave it at the dining table as well in our ashram. And there's no end to my telling of the story. So if you've heard it before, tough luck, you'll hear it again. I won't repeat it, but those who know it will know that it's all about a person's slippers. So, and how a person is attached to them. And the long and short of the story is that in trying to get rid of these tattered slippers, the character of the story, whose name would be Abu Qasim, so happens to be, and the scene is set in Baghdad, in Iraq, and he's trying to get rid of these slippers. And every time he meets a misfortune, and every time he has to pay. And it's only his miserliness that has held on to those slippers. That's the long and short of the story. So in this same way, when we are attached to these three gunas, in other words, to this prakriti, this nature, when we are attached to that, It's like being attached to the ropes that bind you, that you yourself tied yourself up with. And now complain, I can't be free. Well, you can break through them. How do you break through them? Well, the suggestion has already been there, and so further suggestion will come. Ultimately, it'll be telling us, this whole chapter will tell us that there are 4 basic methods. Now, we know these methods anyway because some people condense Swami Vivekananda's teaching into these 4 yogas. But you see, this is an ancient understanding of it. And here we find, presented for the first time actually, comprehensively in one place, a description of these 4 yogas in this very chapter. So we know how to cut the ties. It's not that we don't know, but it requires a willingness. Where does the willingness come from? It comes from this understanding of this separation, that there's this difference between nature and this Purusha. So attachment to the gunas is the cause of his birth in good and evil wombs, going through this adventure as ups and downs and pains and pleasures, and never seemingly having to get out of it. And though wishing to get out for it, knowing that my own nature is freedom, I want to get the freedom. And this desire for freedom expresses itself in many different ways. Socially, we want to be free. Socially, we want the freedom to make our own choices. We hanker for freedom, and yet many people don't know how to directly, instantaneously access their freedom inherent in them. Eventually, says Vedanta, we'll all access our own freedom through the evolutionary process. So by adhering to the superior guna, that is to the sattva aspect, the Jivatman is born as a celestial or fully evolved human being. By holding on to the inferior guna, he is born as an animal or bird. And this is really the whole process of the being born in superior, inferior wombs and so on, from life to life and so on, going on. But is there then no way to get out of this repeated wheel, this samsara, this repetition of birth, life, death, birth, life, death, birth, life, death, and therefore this pleasure-pain syndrome dominated by this pain? So Sri Krishna gives a wonderful assurance. He says, Upadrashta numanta cha bharta bhakta maheshwaraha paramatmeti chapyo yukto dehismin purusha paraha. The Supreme Purusha in this body is also called the spectator, the one who permits, the supporter, the one who experiences the great Lord and the Supreme Self. This is put in 2 ways. There's a Supreme Self, and then there's the experiencer. But you see, if I'm experiencing a play and the play is finished, I don't have to continue experiencing it. If I'm a witness, I can only witness when something is there to witness. When there's nothing to witness, you can't call me, in fairness, the witness. Some supreme entity that stands there without witnessing anything is not a different entity when it witnesses something. And so the Supreme Purusha in this body is also called, according to the different roles, spectator, like a spectator of a sport, a spectator of a drama, spectator of events, or the one who permits and doesn't stop it. Well, lets it continue. Or the supporter and the supporter. Without that support, nothing happens. And of course, the one who experiences, even that insect in the example, is experiencing something because of this entity that we can, in the biocentric view, call life and consciousness. And it's the great Lord, that is the great ruler, the one who is supreme, the one who intrinsically is in control, the one who has developed and designed the one who has arranged the constants in nature, the one who has unfolded the whole of life to produce the questioner, the student, the teacher, and all of the superior things that mankind exhibits as part of human characteristics. So the activities look as if they are manifold, even in the human body, and the Jivatman, enshrouded in ignorance, imagines himself to be the author. I am moving my hands. It is my lifestyle. It is my house. It is my bank account. It is my family. No, this is my body. I've heard this said, you see, that in controversial social issues, some people say, I can do with my body what I like. Is my body. No, who said it was yours? You've made a wrong evaluation. Think of it correctly. Even if God is not involved, you have no business claiming anything, because you have no energy except energy borrowed and used by the sun. It is the sun that radiates the energy. Without the sun, there's no plant growth and life. There's no food. This cooperation between the sun and the sun's rays and the plant life and the hydrogen and the oxygen and the carbon and all this cooperation and the photosynthesis and the cleverness of the plants, all of these combined make for life. We don't think deeply enough. That's the problem. So I often use the example. You tell a class of children, tomorrow I'll bring a cake in that was made by 100 people. They become very excited. Probably a banana cake. Then you see, you bring the cake in tomorrow and you find it's a standard size, and the children are disappointed because they expected a huge thing. And then you have to explain to them, this cake was made not just by 100 people, but many more. Now, in the adult context, we can go further, using the cake still as an example. So you have to consider, where did you get the cake from? Somebody packaged it. Somebody baked it. Somebody compiled the ingredients. Somebody mixed it. Somebody built the factory for it, the bakery for it. Then the electrical company supplied the electrical source for your ovens. And then even before that, there were transport people involved. And then there were people who cultivated the field and sowed the seed. And then there were people who reaped the crop. And then there were people who, now this is just people, but what about the air? What about the water? What about the sunshine? What about the carbon? What about the carbon that came from supernova? What about the people that are physically mere stardust, born from exploding stars? What about the universe? The whole universe made the cake. The whole universe made the flower. The whole universe made the human body. The whole of Mother Prakriti made you what you are. You have no right to be a claimant. And so all of this is there in wonderful passages going through that. A wonderful expression, for example, Bhokta, the one who experiences. A husband is not only the supporter of his wife, but is also a partner, enjoyer, and the one that experiences the family life. In this same way, the omniscient Lord is the one that experiences the insentient Prakriti, not just as a separate entity, but in an intimate relationship. That intimate relationship is echoed in the married life, where the husband and wife seek dialogue, communication, exchange of love, mutual support, interests shared. This is part of nature's design too. Sri Ramakrishna has this to say, and then we leave it off. The universe has come into being as a result of the union of the Purusha and the Prakriti. And do you know how it functions? The master of the family is seated somewhere, absorbed in some serious thought. The housewife busies herself running here and there and attending to all the details of the affairs of the household. Now and then she acquaints her husband with what is taking place here and there and seeks his counsel too when necessary. The man approves of what has taken place already and suggests what ought to take place next. It is in this way that the Purusha and the Prakriti function. Another question that comes from this, of course, does any good accrue from this knowledge of Purusha and Prakriti? We've highlighted some general goods, but what good more specifically? And then how do we then progress to acquiring the ultimate? So we leave it there. I hope I got many more viewers on account of my cap. And so anyway, we leave it there. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.